When Tim Burton's Batman was released in 1989, it was a monumental success, and so there was immediately anticipation for the probable sequel. When Batman Returns opened 3 years later, audiences were not entirely sure what to make of it. And while appreciation for the sequel has grown over time, there are still those who find it too dark, too ridiculous, and with not enough Batman. It's definitely an atypical superhero blockbuster, and the sort we probably won't ever see again. However, I have an immense fondness for the film. To better understand the film's contents, we first have to look at its creation. While Batman does have many of Burton's trademarks, he did not really see it as his movie. He saw it as a film made for the studio and his producers, John Peters and Peter Guber. As a result, he was not all that enthusiastic about directing another one, and opted to make Edward Scissorhands instead. Burton in general has rarely shown an interest in sequels, as contrary to belief, he's not a director who likes repeating himself. Even looking at his filmography, Batman Returns is the only sequel he has ever directed. And while there have been discussions about a possible Beetlejuice sequel, even then his ideas have mostly involved suggesting a parody of Teen Beach movies rather than a traditional continuation. Warner Brothers really wanted Burton back though, and was able to persuade him by allowing much more creative control. Burton and Denise Nenove were also made the producers, as Peters and Guber were running Sony Pictures at the time, although they still retained executive producer credits. So what was the result of Tim Burton being given carte blanche to do whatever he wanted on Batman Returns? Quite possibly the most Tim Burtoniest Tim Burton film ever made. I will admit the first time I saw the film, I liked it, but also found it so strange and bizarre, especially the characterization of the Penguin. I also wondered why it even needed Christopher Walken's villain, when Catwoman and the Penguin are already there. However, on subsequent viewings, I found myself understanding more and more what Burton was going for, and now it's one of my favorite films he has ever directed. I guess it feels appropriate to start with the villains. The Penguin was certainly a departure from the comics, but I think Burton took him in a very creative direction. The idea of Oswald Cobblepot being a literal penguin man allows for an interesting exploration of a monster who has grown to resent the world for how he was thrown away. Danny Devito went all out with his performance too, digging into how repulsive the Penguin is. This is not a character that could have been played subtly, and Burton and the makeup team certainly were not afraid of portraying him rather gruesomely. Stan Winston was largely responsible for the Penguin's makeup, and did a phenomenal job of transforming Devito into the character. Credit should also go to the conceptual artists, including Mark Crash McCreary and Burton himself. Did the filmmakers go too far by having him bite a campaign manager's nose, or having disgusting bile coming out of his mouth? Maybe, but I think they fit with the twisted world created for these films. For me, the most interesting aspect of the Penguin comes when he runs for mayor of Gotham City. The film is able to show his manipulation of the public by presenting this false image of himself, which serves as quite a clever commentary. Although, let's be honest, it would take a lot more than just a leaked recording to end his campaign. There would definitely still be a lot of people wanting to vote for him. Then you have Catwoman, and this version is probably my favorite iteration of the character. As played by Michelle Pfeiffer, she is portrayed as a woman completely beaten down by the world forcing her into a certain expected role, and it finally takes being pushed out of a window and resurrected by cats to bring her inner self out. Pfeiffer is phenomenal playing the dual nature of Selina Kyle and bouncing back and forth between them. Her performance makes it easy to believe that even the often intelligent Bruce Wayne doesn't realize Catwoman and Selina are the same person. When she's in the Catwoman persona, her sly remarks have the needed bite, and the scenes with Catwoman and Batman on the rooftop have the required sexual energy. Meanwhile, the scenes between Bruce and Selina are rather nice, as these two broken people find a connection. You do sense Selina's disappointment when they discover each other's secret identities, as she did grow to genuinely like him. Although the standout scene is probably when she makes her eventual change into Catwoman. It's a brilliant one-woman show on Pfeiffer's part, and we see this definitely is not the same Selina we saw prior to her attempted murder. The use of strings in Danny Elfman's score is a particularly clever touch on the composer's part. Then there's Christopher Walken as Mack Shrek. As I said before, I initially did not see what he exactly brought to the table. However, I eventually came to understand his role, as Shrek serves as the polar opposite to Bruce Wayne, a rich man who uses his wealth as a way to control the city rather than to help it. He's someone who thinks he's really smart, but the film is able to show he's not as smart as he thinks. Shrek assumes he's manipulating the Penguin with the mayoral campaign to help him take control of Gotham and build his power plant, when really the Penguin is the one using him. Walken does do well in portraying the character's moments of menace, especially when he confronts Selina Kyle in the office, although it does seem like the power plant stops being an important plot point after a while. It gets the ball rolling for his first meeting with Penguin, Shrek's disdain for Bruce, and the election story, but is then sort of pushed aside. The other major complaint regarding Batman Returns is that Batman does not have much screen time. This is mostly due to the focus on the three villains, and it does take a while for Bruce Wayne to make his entrance. We even see Alfred a good while before Bruce is first seen. Not to say he's inactive. We get a decent number of fight scenes with Batman, as well as Bruce spending time with Selina and figuring out how to stop his new adversaries. Batman does not even have that much dialogue, which was actually per Michael Keaton's suggestion, as he felt a lot of the lines he said in earlier drafts were not necessary. However, Batman is still a key element, as the film psychologically compares him to Penguin and Catwoman. All of them are traumatized and molded by what a terrible city Gotham is, and as a result have become violent people with anger raging inside of them. Batman just decides to use this to try and do good things, but at the end of the day they are still broken people wearing elaborate costumes. I guess that fits with the other criticism of the film being too dark and messed up. But do you expect any less from Tim Burton? This is a director fascinated with the macabre and the monsters of our society, and when Warner Brothers offered him the creative freedom to do what he wanted, I don't know why they were surprised at what he unleashed. That includes having Batman kill goons left and right, but that's something that goes back to the early comics, when he did not have a strict no-killing rule. But if someone is not fond of Burton's style, themes, and quirky sense of humor, I can understand why Batman Returns can seem off-putting. One of the things I love about the movie is the visual imagination. This is a stunning-looking film, with every department pulling out all the stops to bring Gotham City to the screen, in a way that was slightly different than the Art Deco appearance of its predecessor. Burton and his collaborators really leaned into German expressionism, with everything from the production design to the makeup looking like they belong in the 1920s German silent film. This is most evident with the Penguin, who bears a certain resemblance to the villain from the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Even his makeup is similar to what silent film actors would wear, and Mack Shrek's name is derived from the lead actor in Nosferatu. Bo Welch did a phenomenal job of expanding Gotham City, with the town square and the Penguin Zoo hideaway standing out. Meanwhile, I love the way Stefan Zapsky uses his camera, either moving it in creative ways through the city or finding ironic placements for the still shots. I also think Batman Returns does not get nearly enough credit for its innovative use of special effects. There are plenty of miniatures which blend seamlessly with the larger-than-life sets. The movie also used computer-generated effects in places I don't think most of the audience were aware of. All the bats you see in the movie, for example, were entirely done on the computer, as the filmmakers knew wrangling and training real bats to do what they wanted would have been nearly impossible. The penguins were also quite revolutionary. There were real penguins used for some scenes, much to the annoyance of animal rights groups, although Burton made sure they were well taken care of, and they supposedly got better treatment than even the human actors, as the set was cooled down to accommodate them. The effects team also used animatronics, CGI, and even people in costumes for certain shots. For the score, Danny Elfman went all out and composed a beautiful and operatic soundtrack. There are some excellent leitmotifs for Penguin and Catwoman, and Elfman also tweaked his popular Batman theme to fit the tone of the sequel. This is the kind of score you can listen to separate from the movie and still be immersed in the compositions created. Batman Returns is truly an example of not only Burton's incredible imagination, but also how well he works with his production team to make sure his movies bring audiences amazing visuals and unique sounds. When talking about Batman Returns, it's also important to mention the aftermath of its release. One commonly told story is that McDonald's got in trouble for promoting the movie, and they pulled the Happy Meal toys as a result. But that's not entirely true. Parents did complain about the violence in the movie, despite it being rated PG-13, and both Warner Brothers and McDonald's offered a response. However, McDonald's never pulled the toys, and continued including them in the Happy Meals for the 2 months they were contractually obligated to. What's interesting is when you look at the Happy Meal commercial, they're just marketed as general Batman toys, with no mention of the film. McDonald's did market cups with Batman Returns imagery, but they made sure from the beginning to distance the toys from the movie, although the parental complaints did lead the Golden Arches to be more careful about future times. And while Batman Returns did perform well at the box office, there was a noticeable drop in ticket sales from the first film. So Warner Brothers politely suggested that maybe Burton do something else in the meantime, which he quickly realized was their unique Hollywood way of telling him they did not want him to direct the next Batman movie. Then we got the more colorful and toy-friendly Batman Forever 3 years later. In the end, despite its reputation, I think Batman Returns works as the delightful result of a director being allowed to run free on a popular property, and taking it down plenty of unique, strange, and visually inventive paths. It's grown into one of my favorite Batman films, and another example of why Tim Burton is a director with plenty of clever tricks up his sleeve. See you next time.